All right, it's 9 o'clock in the morning, right? The day after the attendee party, so we're all sharp. My name is Richard Campbell. I normally make a lot of podcasts when I'm here, but we're only making a few this week, so I was able to squeeze a talk in as well. And this is the Building Trusted Teams talk is the one I chose. Of course, I have my caffeinated beverage because it is early. Because I'm from British Columbia. I know I speak like an American, but I'm not. I'm a Canadian. I'm, from the colonies. My house is on the left. The house on the right is my neighbor's place. We call this camera the Animal Highway because there's a forest behind it. And this is a Wednesday morning about 6 a.m. And Wednesdays are garbage day in my neighborhood. And so this guy is just coming to check to see if I put out my garbage early. I don't think there's any bears left in the UK, is there? I know. I was trying to find, do you have any reference for black bears? But you still see the back of him there? He's actually standing at the top of my driveway surveying his domain. And if that doesn't get you, this is the same camera a year later, got a little bit moved. And we didn't know that bears came through pretty much every week until we put the camera in because they're pretty stealthy, but this is not a bear. Any guesses? It's a juvenile mountain lion. It's about 30 kilos of cat. And this is a small one. Anyway, this is one made the news because, we're used to bears. Bears are kind of a normal thing. Moving to the neighborhood, nobody gets particularly freaked out unless they're out during the day when the kids are around. But nobody likes a mountain lion. So that's Fish and Wildlife came out. They didn't find him. He was a juvenile. He was lost. He shouldn't have been in town, but that was fairly exciting. So that's what it's like living in BC, just wildlife all the time. And it was in BC I wrote my first line of code in 1977. So I may be older than I look. That is not the most important thing that happened in 1977. The most important thing that happened in 1977 was Star Wars, right? Keep your priorities straight. The computer in question was a TRS-80 Model 1. It only had 4K of RAM, a cassette tape player for storing programs on, and a version of BASIC that was not made by Microsoft. It was a tiny BASIC, and it only had 3 error messages. What? How? And sorry. You'd say print divide 1 by 0, and it'd say sorry. Which I think is still a very polite error message, right? I am Canadian after all. The difference is today, now we have GUIs and stuff, so it's not enough that Windows tells you you're wrong. It also makes you agree with it. Registry is corrupt. Okay? There's no not okay button. And let's face it, if your registry is corrupt, it's not okay. But now you have to agree with it. I do spend a lot of my time making podcasts, and I think there's a few .NET Rocks listeners in the room. So yeah, thanks. My friend Carl Franklin started that back in 2002, which means he predates the word podcast by 3 years. I was a guest in 2004, and then in 2005 he asked me to be the co-host. So I took on the co-hosting duties at show 100. There are 2 co-hosts before me. Mark Dunn did the first 50. Rory Blythe was co-host on the second 50 when I was a guest. So I figured when I came on at 100, I'll do 50. And we're at 1672, so close. In 2007, I also started a show called Run As Radio, which was for IT pros. Every Wednesday since April 2007, we've published shows, so we're at 673 of those. And for a brief interval from 2011 to 2014, when we weren't sure if .NET rocked, we made a show called The Tablet Show. It was our contingency plan when Windows 8 was coming and we were all sort of uncertain of the future. And I was trying to figure out how to talk about tablet stuff coherently, and so we put it in its own show. But by 2014, it was clear that .NET did rock, and we rolled the Tablet Show back into .NET Rocks. All right, and another aspect of my life that, again, I don't generally talk about, but for this topic is relevant, is I have been involved in a number of different business ventures in a variety of capacities. You might have heard it on the show if you've listened further back, but a company called Strange Loop Networks. So it was a startup we put together actually in 2006, We were making appliances for making websites go faster. So taking everything we learned through the dot-com boom about making fast websites and actually built it into an appliance. And that company got acquired by Radware in 2013. I also sat on the board of Tol Eric. Today you know them as Progress, which Progress acquired Tol Eric in 2014. And I'm these days mostly involved in ventures as an advisor primarily. And an example of that would be a company you haven't heard of called Vortex. And actually what we're doing there is we're trying to build Expedia for containers. So shipping containers. Right now, largely, if you need a shipping container to move something from China, to Europe, you're gonna order it via fax, really. And so building good software to allow you to find what containers are available on what ships, at what prices, with what services, that's the sort of things we're working on. So I've always had a strong business background, working in different kinds of companies and working with lots of different teams. That being said, I don't feel like I'm an expert in trust. I don't know how you be an expert in trust. The reason this session exists is because of a podcast. The guys at SQL Data Partners asked me to be a guest on their show, and I'm not a hypocrite, so if somebody asks me to come on a podcast, I say yes. You think about how many times in a given year I ask someone to come on a podcast. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of 200, right? So yeah, I'm gonna say yes. And the show ended up being about trust. The story, they were talking from the context of a DBA who was working with a group of developers and trying to convince them, we can improve the performance of this application by changing some code as well as changing some aspects of the database. So they were doing a little entity framework work, and they thought if you do some stored procedures, but you're gonna have to make some changes, and they managed to talk them into it. It made a difference in the app, and then they said, great, let's go start on the next app. And they're like, oh, hang on there. And he's like, well, what do I gotta do? We've clearly demonstrated this. And so I started with, hey, look, one point of reference is not a line. Trust takes longer than that. And then an hour went by. And then after that show was published, the folks at the PASS conference, which is the big SQL Server conference, asked me if I would make that into a talk. And I thought, okay, what did I say? So I listened to the show and took notes from myself, which is weird. And it turned into this, but really sort of foundational material for me, the way I learned to work in teams. I'm gonna reference 3 books. And I'll throw this picture of these 3 books back up later in the deck as well. And I'll mention some of the elements of it. In the center, the classic, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where Stephen Covey talks about sort of 3 things you can do for yourself. So about being proactive and beginning with the end in mind, and putting first things first. 3 things that you do in a team: thinking win-win, seeking first to understand and then being understood, synergizing or valuing the difference, and the 7th habit being sharpening the saw, which is what we're doing this week, right? That we take time away from work to hone our own tools, our own capabilities, to think about, well, if we're working on the things that matter to us, and the sort of story is a guy trying to cut down a tree with a big saw, and it's taking longer and longer because the saw's really dull, and somebody says, why don't you stop for a minute and sharpen the saw? This is, I'm too busy cutting down the tree, can't you see? So we have to take time once in a while to focus on the leadership of our careers as opposed to the management of our careers. Most of the time you're managing your career, you're doing it, as opposed to the times where you sort of step back and go, am I working on the things I want to work on? Am I efficient? Am I skilled in the things I need for that? So that's 7 habits. Drive, I think, is especially relevant for us in the technology industry, because Pink talks about that after the basic bills are paid, after a reasonable wage, money does not motivate people. In fact, money can become quite poisonous to work. That what actually motivates people when the basics are taken care of are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy being, I want to be able to work on what I want to work on, how I want to work. Mastery being, I need opportunities to press against the edges of my skills, not just do the same things each day. And purpose, that we're doing something more important than just making a paycheck. You know, you think if we were really just cogs in a machine that are good at typing, we wouldn't care what happened to the software we made. But we care. You know, you never see a more unhappy developer than someone that's worked a year on some code that no one ever uses. Purpose matters. And that's really, Drive focuses on that. Last of the three here, A Powerful Engagement, is an interesting book because it talks about management of your work from the perspective of energy versus time. There's lots of time management theories out there, and they make the point that we all have the same amount of time. The question is, how do you manage your energy? Or more relevantly, how do you recharge your battery so that when you do work, you work fast. You get a lot done. You are charged by doing it. I'll refer to these as we talk through this, because we're talking about trust, and trust's a funny concept. You know, humans are kind of hardwired to trust each other. We are a sort of collective people. We're social people, and so we want to trust. From the very beginning, babies cling to other humans, right? Right from the very beginning. The question is, what is trust? When you're put into a situation where it's useful for us to trust each other, how do you grow that? And the best definition I know of trust is that when we have shared values. So when I know that you value things that I value, and values is a tricky one because there are a lot of values, literally hundreds. If you go searching on the interwebs, you'll find out that there are lists and lists of values. I could throw out a handful, things like integrity and compassion and honesty. These are kind of easy ones. There are more complicated ones. But they are all values, and our ability to share them with the people around it and see that we have common ground on that, that's the basis of trust. Now, do you have to have trust? Is it an essential part of work? Well, not really, right? We want to be able to feel safe at work. That safety part is our ability to take some chances, to explore, to press against it. You can function without safety and without trust. You can just protect yourself. And I'm sure you've met a coworker at one point or another who was just kind of walled off from everyone else. That they do their work and move on. It's not a fun way to work. It's not the most productive way to work, largely because when you're focused on safety and protection, you can't take any chances. And we get back to that pink concept of mastery. To press against the edges of your skills is to risk failure. That's the concept. The risk of failure is kind of fun. And when you succeed and move the edge of your skill further forward, that's growth. And it makes work more interesting. But you have to feel that you can fail, that you can take a risk. And there's an awful lot of employment today that leaves no room for failure. We're in an exploratory industry. Software is young, 50, 60, 70 years old, depending on how you measure it. We will be an engineering discipline one day, and we are not today. But it's inevitable. We're starting to teach people as software engineers. We're starting to apply those kinds of standards, and those standards bodies allow us to work within a framework that would make for the very reliable software. But while we explore, we must be able to fail. Otherwise, we stay within very narrow bounds of what we believe are safe, and often fail for other reasons. Not just because we hit the edge of the software, but because we hit the edge of a budget or time. So you need to be allowed to fail, and when I've been brought in into organizations as a consultant, I pretty much start at the top and see what their tolerance to failure actually is. And it's very common that senior leadership says, oh yeah, we're willing, move fast and break things. We're willing to fail. And the next tier down, not so much. Those people are a whole lot more conservative about that. It's like, you can definitely fail, but no downtime. So the comfort level we have with failure sort of dictates our ability to maneuver. It doesn't mean we have to have all of those things. Often we wrap ourselves in the different aspects of our work, the different people in our work working on software, in a product. There are products that define us in some respects. Not that I'm not just a software developer, I'm a node developer. I'm not just a DBA, SQL Server person. right? That kind of mindset. And it's a way to separate us. Actually, what it says is, I have a value you don't have. And so we trust each other less. And it's incorrect. Yes, we all use products, but our actual roles within organizations are not product specific. Right? You are responsible for creating features and whatever tools that you're using. You're responsible for shepherding data as a DBA. You're responsible for network operations and stability. Those are not products. And actually, when you really look at everyone's work, and I think the DevOps movement is helping us to embrace this idea, we are all engaged in providing customer value. When we focus on product, we tend to decrease our ability to trust each other. But when we focus on customer value, which we all are responsible for, that's a shared value. That's an increase in trust. So now that we sort of get a picture of what it is to explore trust, let's talk about how we interact at work. And there's a few different aspects of our roles at work. One of them is leadership. Leadership is a funny concept because it's not it is bestowed, but not by on high. It is bestowed by your peers when they choose to follow you. You've certainly worked in or been in an organization where the boss wasn't the leader. There was somebody else in the team that kind of knew their way around all the problems. So the person you would go to, a person that would help make a decision, and we'd all go along with it. That's leadership, right? I mean, in the end, if you don't have to have any particular authority. You can walk in front and everyone walks the same way as you. You're kind of leading. Now, there is also authority. But let's make authority, recognize it separately from leadership. Leadership is your ability to have people follow you. Authority is something bestowed upon you by another authority. And it doesn't necessarily have any power per se, but this is very much a cultural thing. Depending on where I am in the world when you have this conversation, there are places in the world where authority is everything. It's simple. He who has the authority leads, right? In the Americas especially, where they got that anti-authoritarian streak, not so much. The third aspect, and I would think by far the most, is influence. So that is essentially the ability to persuade or the ability to alter behavior. And I'm not going to say good or bad, it's just an ability. And we all have all three things: leadership, authority, influence, in everything that we do, in different quantities. Now, really effective leaders, the ones you've admired, use these three aspects carefully. One would argue the only one of the three you really have control over is influence, is your ability to affect the behavior of others. A good leader influences his group, the folks that should follow him. In fact, the aspect of those three that you would use the least is authority. Wise leaders resist applying authority to the very end. Really wise ones wait until authority is demanded. We have argued this out. Somebody has to make the call. You're the leader. Decide. Leaders love that because then authority is not a hammer, right? I'm not demanding you do things a certain way. I'm seeing the consensus as far as we've gotten, and I'm calling the ball because we want to move ahead. But we're rarely actually the leader. We're rarely at the peak of authority. We've all at different times in the work that we're doing where we see a way forward. We see a technology that's going to make a difference. And if only we were in charge, this would be fine. Let's be really honest. We're never going to be in charge. Right? That's just not how it's going to work out. The only way that we actually take our skills and our knowledge and our beliefs and apply them to work successfully is through influence. This is the skill you can cultivate. You don't have to be the CEO to affect the direction of the company. You just have to be able to affect the CEO. That's influence. And it's a useful skill. It's something you can put your time into. And it's shaped by your ability to communicate. And we're all communicating all the time in various ways, whether we understand it or not. And communication is more complex today than it's been probably ever because we have so many mediums. Once upon a time, the only way we communicated was standing face to face with each other. Maybe some smoke signals. Now we have technology, and that impacts our ability to communicate. It increases our reach. We can speak to more people, but at a limited way. So, and when a given medium isn't working for you, the trick is to change the medium. So let's work through a couple of communication paths. For instance, instant messenger. Instant messenger is a great tool. Why? It is asynchronous. I can send you a message without having to know whether you're there or not. It is non-interrupting. If you turn off the bell, it doesn't have to interrupt you. It's perfectly functional, asynchronous, and non-interrupting. But it's narrow bandwidth. It's only a few characters, maybe some emojis to help, but that's kind of the limit of what it can do. And so text messages can go poorly. In a high trust situation, if we already trust each other, which is generally the only time you use an instant message approach, so somebody you already know well, where you hear my voice in my words anyway, instant message works great. Would you instant message with someone you don't really know? Not so much. It's harder. You have to sort of explain things. It's kind of a weak medium for that. And so when the message isn't being well received, you change the medium. Let's go to email, because email's good. Now, what's great about email? It's asynchronous. It's non-interrupting. It's long format, maybe too long. Now, I judge the quality of an email conversation by whether the email is getting longer in reply or shorter. If you write me a paragraph and I respond with 3 and you respond with 16, we're going the wrong way. That is not increasing communication, right? That's beating you into submission with more words, right? A good email chain gets shorter. The perfect ending to an email is okay or thanks. And if the email is getting longer, change the medium. The medium's not working. So you could try a phone call. Now, what's wrong with phone calls? It's funny that we all have phones, rarely use them for phone calls. Well, the previous mediums were asynchronous and non-interrupting. A telephone is synchronous and interrupting. And in this era of constant demands on your attention, we're more aware than ever in our lives that interrupting with a phone call is actually a statement. And the statement is, I don't care what you're doing, pay attention to me. It's the most important thing. And you're wrong. Which is why I've come to appreciate, there are no phone calls in my life that I want that aren't in my schedule. The phone rings and I don't have a reminder already popped up from Outlook that there's a call coming, I don't answer it. And when I do answer it, I'm sad. Pretty consistently. Why did I answer this? Because I am being interrupted from whatever I was working on, which was important enough that I was working on it, for something that almost certainly isn't as important. And if you are careful with telephone etiquette, you actually use one of the other mediums ahead of it. You instant message them, hey, you got time for a call? That's the social nicety. It says, can I interrupt you? Right? That's now become important. It didn't used to be. Once upon a time, the phone was novel. When it rang, it was exciting. Oh my goodness, it did a thing. Let's see what it does. It's not like that anymore. We all have them. We're all busy. And we have to be respectful of people's focus. And that we have some humility over our needs versus their needs, right? It's a kind of a shared value there, right? I trust you not to interrupt me with the mundane. Now, there's also the conference call. The conference call is just like the telephone call, except that we spend 15 minutes making sure everybody is angry before we start the call. I actually took a step back and I was this is great with families too. Like, have you ever recorded the morning? Because my girls, they were mean to their mom. So I just started recording the morning and playing it back at dinner time. It's like, is this really how we want to start our day? Going to work and going to school with these are the words that were left each morning? Well, I started doing that with meetings too. It's like, what are the chances of this being a positive and constructive meeting when we've just spent 10 minutes cursing Skype? We're trying to influence, right? We're trying to make progress. We're trying to pull ourselves in the same direction, and the tools are impairing us. They're convenient, but ineffective until you can get it smooth enough that it's not part of the friction. We already had friction. That's why we're having a meeting. So reducing the friction in those becomes really important. And then ultimately, if a meeting's not working, and you've been to lots of meetings that don't work, if the outcome of a meeting is another meeting, that's a fail, right? The goal was to make a decision, right? Was to make progress, to get aligned. And if that's not what came out of the meeting, stop. Face-to-face, one-on-one, better meetings, lower friction, right? Folks on a conference call, but the most productive things you've ever done, the best communication you've ever done, probably one-on-one. And that's very limiting because it's synchronous, it's interrupting, it's time-consuming, but it's effective. But there is a form of communication higher than the one-on-one meeting, and it's pizza. You like pepperoni? That's good. You like vegetarian? Okay. Ham and pineapple? Oh, yeah? All right. Heathens. Anchovy and olive? Pizza choice is kind of an interesting thing, Talk about stronger forms of communication. What do you like? We're here to share values. Apparently I have ham and pineapple people to share values with. Humans are hardwired to trust the people they break bread with. It's in our caveman brain that when we sat around the fire and shared food, those are our family. We spend our workday working, exercising the trust in our team. It's hard to build trust when you have to count on it at the same time. I would argue that the only time we actually have in a given workday to grow trust, that is to spend time sharing values and connecting on those, is lunch. If you're a leader of a team or you're new to a team, or you are in a position where you need to think about, am I well connected with this team? Do I trust this team? Does this team trust me? Plan your lunches. They are the single best time. As an external person, as a consultant coming in, watching teams, the team that ate together was more productive together. These are core rituals of humanity. And I'm not saying I want to manipulate them, it's that I want to value them. When it was my responsibility to lead the team, I had lunch with my team. I had one-on-one, in groups. A group lunch is great up to a certain size. If they can't all hear each other, the goal was not to eat food. Eating food is necessary, but the goal was to communicate. So as soon as the table's too big and you can't communicate with each other, you're kind of breaking the ability to grow trust. So size matters. And if your team's tight, works well with each other, like each other, trust each other, share values, as a team lead, you start reaching across teams. Have lunch with another team, because we have to work together too. There are points of communication. Lunches are important. There's only so many in a year. Plan them. Take time on them. They're valuable. There are other opportunities, but this is the easy one that we can all do. Just be thoughtful. It's good to have lunch with your team, but if your team's pretty stable, you can do more. You can reach further out. I like a good lunch and learn, where we all get together and there's a technology or something to talk about, essentially a subject. They can also be a trust-building exercise. The few things I'd say about lunch and learn is make the learn part short enough that we can talk about it, right? Because the talking part turned out that was actually the important part. Also, present them as ideas, not fait accomplis. Not, saw this new technology, I think we should implement it next week, watch this video, right? Great way to alienate, to not build trust, as opposed to, hey, what do you think of this? And then you can talk about it, right? Come at it from equal footing, whatever form it comes in. There are people who value privacy in their lunches, that it's their downtime. When we're in an industry that has a lot of introverts in it. You need to be able to recharge batteries, and sometimes that's off on your own. I appreciate that, and I think it's important, and you can't do it all the time. Because we're also social creatures. We also need to build trust. And so schedule those two. You can do both. Inviting teams to come and make presentations to other teams. So one of the best things I ever did at StrangeLoop was we were doing, the hard part about that technology of building an appliance to make websites go faster is you have to put it in a customer's network, and every customer's network is broken in some way. The hardest job at StrangeLoop by far were the system engineers, were the folks that had to make the appliance work and in process debug the customer's network, inevitably. And developers who are absolutely convinced they have the hardest job in the world because they are creating new things, just did not appreciate how hard it was for an SE to be successful with the product. No different than an operations person. Like, hey, we built a software there, Monkey Boy, deliver it, right? Make it up and running. And so we did cross-team meetings. We had the devs sit in on an SE going through the process of an installation just so they could see it, right? At the same time we did with the SEs, like how do we build and test a feature, right? With the operations teams about how we monitor and maintain. The goal of every one of those meetings, in my mind as the leader, was for the two teams to come out of the lunch going, wow, your job's hard. Thanks for doing it, right? An appreciation of what's hard. There's a shared value right there, that we appreciate the effort that each of us put into those different roles, that all of those roles are important, that we don't get to provide customer value until everyone succeeds in their role. And you have some appreciation for that. You give some room for it to take longer, to have problems. It's like, I don't know why you guys take so long to deploy the software. I mean, how hard could it be? Hard. I would also say, and I love this XKCD comic for this, be kind to people who don't know something, because it's actually a really good day when you get to teach and they get to learn too. Be excited about that. Don't be dismissive of it. Look, you don't know that? Or the bigger sin, but don't worry, that's easy. It's one of the biggest crimes in technology is we call stuff easy, because it's a lie and it's undermining. Someone comes to you and say, explain to me this reactive extensions. You're like, don't worry, it's easy, right? What have you just said? You must be an idiot for not knowing this. And what I do is trivial. And it's not easy. It was actually hard. It's like, don't worry. I figured this out. It takes a bit of effort. I'll walk you through it. It'll be great, but not easy. Right? Let's not devalue our work, much less devalue others. Stuff's hard, but worth it, valuable. Those are positive ways to approach those ideas. I am not a big fan of team building exercises. I am sure for some group of people, this is awesome. Just nobody I've ever worked with. However, there are other ways. This is another aspect of building trust. We get beyond this basic concept of trust within a team. What is the culture of our team? What does our team value? There's all these different possible values. And yeah, there's the low-hanging fruits of compassion and honesty and integrity. But there are more specific aspects that maybe we should highlight, that there are a way we can strengthen our team further. So let me give you an example. At StrangeLoop, we were mostly developers. We were building new technology. And at least half the company were software developers, and they worked best at home, right? That's their controlled space. We want them to do original thinking. We had an IRC channel. That was sort of our chat. But every Friday, everybody came into the office. And this is code review time. This is when we go through what we've built so far and talk about what's going to happen next week, all those sorts of things. Of course, I'm going to feed them because you trust who you eat with. We only got 1 day a week together. I want to strengthen that, so provide food. And I believe that nothing succeeds like excess, so there's a lot of food. And the leftover food was created discomfort for certain people. So, it's the end of the meal, we end of eating, we're still talking, we're ready to move on to the next thing, and more than one of the folks in the room are like, can we take a few minutes? I'd like to take this down to the soup kitchen, the leftovers. I'm like, sure, that seems reasonable. It's a heck of a lot better than throwing it away. And, we were in Vancouver, and there's, there's folks down and out there, and food's appreciated. And so it just became, let's take 20 minutes, folks run this food off to go to the various places that will take it, and it'll help people. It was a value, a cultural element of our team that was important, that we're respectful and useful with food. What can I do with that? Like, it was a hint of something, because I want to build more trust. Lunch we can do some with, but if we were going to go outside of lunch, we're going to do more. What would we do? Well, knowing that food was important, how about we do a soup kitchen? Or this was actually a food bank. If serving your community this way is important to your team, let me tell you what's great about a food bank. It's the dullest, dumbest work you've ever seen in your life. You've got groceries on one side and boxes on the other side, and it's like 2 lima beans go in the box, 2 Kraft macaroni and cheese go in the box. Like, within a few minutes, the average programmer is going to figure out the routine. But boring is good, because the goal was to talk. And so suddenly we're all in a line working on something we value, something important, but a little trivial, a little easy, and we talk to each other. And the team got that much stronger. We tried it with soup kitchens too. Same thing, serving up plates, not that hard. You got room to think, room to explore, room to get to know each other. One of the things that came out of these kinds of exercises? Nicknames. A nickname, kindly given, is a manifestation of a shared experience. When that nickname is deployed at work, it's a reminder of trust. And the same thing, I saw teams where everybody ended up with a nickname. Really strong teams. Kindly given. There are mean names too. Actually, I changed up the Christmas presents because of that. We essentially would give gag Christmas presents, sort of collectively as leadership, for whatever terrible, silly thing happened, right? Whatever that may be. So, the guy who lost his keys down the drain trying to get to the food bank, we gave him one of the ping clips. It's like, here, just clap your hands when you hear that beep. That's the keys you can't get to. But that's the sort of thing, right? Reminders of when we've worked together, when we've trusted each other. Anytime we can remind ourselves, I have this group of people I care about, that I value, that's a strong team. I also did Habitat for Humanity, which is tough because, watching a great software engineer paint a fence, like, okay. I'm actually pretty good at electrical wiring, so they were all surprised because apparently I'm not actually good at anything, but boy, I could pull some Romex. This brings up another aspect, though. We certainly ran into this with Habitat Humanity, because it's a whole weekend, right? We were in a startup. We were already working long hours. And then, on the weekend, you're going to go team building, right? This is a spouse. And the guy, and the employee's like, listen, I think it could be great. I can't do it. I can't go home and say, hey, I'm going to now go spend 2 more days with my coworkers, have a good time with the kids. Now, there's an answer, and the answer was pretty easy, and it was child-minding. All right, go home. I'm going to take the kids with me, right? I paid for a little bit of child-minding, right, for a couple professionals to do face painting and drawing and so forth while we were doing the team building exercise. So that turned from, I'm leaving you again over the weekend, to, hey, go play. Do whatever you want. I'll take the kids. And then realized, my children were grown by the time we were doing this, and I didn't have to supervise them, but I had plenty of young families in the company. And it's like, well, I got to plan this into every team building exercise. Anything we're going to do extracurricular, evenings and so forth, how do we manage the kids too? How do they be a part of it? If you're a leader and you're putting together something where you're going to include family members in any respect, take a minute and thank them. It's a small thing, but it makes a huge difference. You've got a strong purpose and a strong culture around what you're doing at work with your team. When you get a chance to share that with their families, say, hey, part of the reason our team is great is the families that are involved. We all are affected by those values one way or the other. And including them is important. Do you understand the culture and the group that you have here? It's no different than figuring out the right pizza. You know what's embarrassing? Brought pizza into the office for a month before I found out there were 3 vegetarians. And we weren't getting any vegetarian pizzas. It's like, and this why didn't you say something is the wrong answer. Why didn't you check? That's your job. We're trying to strengthen a team and you're alienating people with pizza. Like, you missed an easy one. Figuring out what people like is important. I'm not a huge fan of the offsite because it's an us or them. There's 2 problems with offsites. The first is if you include anybody, then it's just a party and we're not going to get any work done and it's expensive, right? You want to keep the group as small as possible. The only time I would do an offsite is when we're going to make a very unpleasant decision, one that people don't want to make. And so we would include the people that have to be part of that decision, and we'd have exactly 1 agenda item, that decision. Because if you bring a bunch of agenda items, you're going to do all the easy ones and just not get to the hard one. So we didn't bring any easy ones, right? Yeah, you're getting away. I'm in British Columbia, so the thing that was easy for us to do was to go up into the mountains in a cabin with no cell service and make a decision. Because you're kind of undistracted, sort of get there. But the goal, it had to be unpleasant enough, right? It had to be something hard that we would isolate ourselves over those things. One way that there are easier ways to strengthen a team. Actually, a good offsite is a team challenge. We're going to go press against something that's going to affect the business, and it's hard. Otherwise, offsites get a little unruly. Remote workers. We've got all this stuff we do to collectively and having lunch with and so forth. And you always have some folks that are remote, that are really remote. Like coming into the office is hard. So a few things that I suggest here. One is they can't not ever come into the office. Maybe it's only a couple of times a year, but it has to be once in a while. It's going to be an expense, it's independent, but there's a bunch of things you can do with that too. When I have a group where at least 1 or 2 members are always remote, they're always at the other end of the phone, I will also ask other members of the group to occasionally be on the other end of the phone. If it's 4 people that are always in a room together and 1 person remote, the 1 person remote is other effectively. We make them not other by having at least a few of the other members go just into their office for that matter and call in, just to be down the same skinny pipe of communication that remote person is at. A little bit of empathy goes a long way for how bad the sound is, right? One of the best things I did for the 3 full-time remote workers we had at Strange Room, bought them high-end headsets, Plantronic Savies. It's a few $100s, but it's like, I know you're remote, but I want you to sound great. Because if you also sound terrible, it's just all the worse, right? Good headsets. It's trivial. It's a couple $100, and it makes every communication better. The other challenge with remote workers is that we tend to only communicate them when there's something important, which leaves them out of the social piece. So, tools like Slack and IRC and so forth have helped with that, where we're all sort of communicating the same means, that the water cooler is now digital. That's good. But I also made a point, and I still do this to this day, of having coffee with a remote worker. Hey, I'm about to go get a cup of tea. Do you want to go get the beverage of your choice? The biggest point is video on, no agenda. That's the point, right? We're just consuming our beverage of choice and chatting. It's hard. You're usually used to, oh, don't forget about da-da-da-da, oh, wait, we're working again. As opposed to what we should be doing, which is sharing values. How are your kids? What are you doing, on the weekend? Like, that's what those things look like, right? Those conversations ultimately are what strengthens a team and includes a remote worker. I've also had remote teams. Maybe it's a contractor team, maybe it's a wholly owned subsidiary, something like that. So we have a dev team in a different country. Not to make, too fine a point of it. So imagine you have a dev team in Boston, you have a dev team in Bulgaria. I need these teams to trust each other. It's not, we do, right? How do you build trust? It'd be great if you could just bring everybody together and, hang out, but that's really expensive and challenging. So we'd bring a member from the Bulgarian team to Boston for a month. And then 6 months later, a member from Boston go to Bulgaria for a month. Now here's the trick. What member? Who? There are three aspects: leadership, authority, influence. What is the aspect that's going to make the biggest difference in the cultural exchange? It's influence. The tendency is to take the most senior person, the one with the most authority. It's almost always a mistake. You want the influencer. My best measure of a junior person who's a great influencer is who knows the birthdays of the entire team and their kids. You know that person. Why? When I bring that person there for a month, they're now on the other side of the call, right? So there's this sort of fun, hey, look, you're on the other side of the call, and sort of see what the call is like. And then, but this is also the person, because they know all those things about their team, they talk to that whole team. Wow, how else would they know all that? So once they get back, they're going to share those experiences. They're going to convey that trust upon that group. That's what's powerful. And it's tricky to pick the right person. And folks are going to be bent out of shape based on who you pick, too. But it's worth it. I need an influencer when we do an exchange like that. That's what's powerful. That's what makes the biggest impact and strengthens the team. If you can afford to get them all together, do it. It's worth it. Makes the team stronger, without a doubt. And don't do it for a week. If a person's only there long enough to get over the jet lag and come back, they're just not effective as influencers. They have to be long enough that they can actually be comfortable, embrace and get off the main, okay, we have done all the sites, into the eating at my favorite greasy spoon stage of being there, right? Getting past, we have a planned, going out for a formal thing every day. That's fun for a week. After a while, it's like, I'd like to go to bed early tonight. Like, you actually wind down and get into the routine. That's why a month is powerful. You get into a routine being there. You kind of get a taste and comfort with the culture of what it's actually like. And it should be someone who travels well. If you're going to be sick the whole time, which some people are, then that's not a good fit. But those kinds of exchanges done well, everything gets better. It really empowers the team. I know these are lots of different pieces, lots of different ideas and thoughts and steps, right? And maybe it seems contrived, and it's not, right? I'm looking for you to do the right thing for the right reason, which is that you want to be successful and productive. And as a leader, you play a huge role. You have to be the exemplar. You have to be the example that everyone looks at. And so it starts with being honest about what you're doing. I am trying to strengthen this team. I think we can be better. I'm not saying we're bad. I think we can be better, and I want to try. And that means also owning up when you make mistakes, because you will, right? It'll start with, if you try and do a team building exercise, just ask me how I know, right? But owning up to that, it's like, okay, that didn't go well. Like, is it just me, or didn't it look like we were having a lot of fun, right? You'll know the difference when you get the right one compared to getting the wrong one. So owning up to your mistakes and genuinely apologizing, recognizing that a real apology has no but in it, right? It's like, I meant this happened, it had this impact on you, and I am sorry, right? I meant to include everyone in lunch. I did not check to see that you were a vegetarian. And that's my failure. I know better than that, and I'm sorry. I'm going to do my best not to have that happen again. No buts. Real apologies. They're powerful, right? And that is a shared value. I'm not saying screw up so you can strengthen values. That's not a good system. But I'm also saying when there's a mistake, it is an opportunity to share a value. Don't waste it. Few calls to action. Taking time. We all have the same amount of time. You need to do the things that keep you well. You need to spend the time well. I would also say control your schedule. Take a good look at your schedule from a meta perspective. How many things on your schedule are things you want rather than things other people want? Right? Most of the time, it's easy to fall in trap where the only thing on your schedule are meetings, which nobody wants, and garbage day. Blocking out time for the other things that are important to you. Plan your lunches. Plan times to make your team stronger, to meet with the people you need to meet with. There's no fast way to build trust. It takes time. You can get better at it, but the main thing is that it becomes routine for you to press against trust. You're always going to need to communicate. The number one thing people fail at, that they struggle with, is not communicating effectively. And that means learning about the people around you so that you know how they communicate and they learn how you communicate and what works, being flexible, changing up the medium. Time for self-leadership, leading yourself. That's kind of what you're doing this week, right? You're here working on yourself, right? You're learning new things. You're sort of tasting the buffet of sessions. You don't get to lead your career very often. And I would also say just a couple of days is almost not enough. I tend to take a week away from work to sort of reflect on, am I doing the things I want to do? It takes a while to really sort of clear your head of the day-to-day, start thinking more broadly about, am I going the direction I want to go in? Make some notes. You're going to get inspirations. Mostly you're going to say, I need to look into X, which is not something you'll normally think about. So it's good to sort of go back and say, am I doing the right thing? Oh, and by the way, you are your worst critic. I don't care who you are your worst critic. Give yourself a break. We're all trying to do better. It's all right. Make time to learn. Most of the smartest people you've ever met, most of the successful people you've ever met, big on learning all the time. Trick to being able to learn, put it in your schedule. Block out time to read if you like reading. Now, different mediums for different people. Some would rather consume video. Some would rather consume podcasts, and thank you. I don't like podcasts, they're crass. I'm a reader, actually. I read fast, I read voraciously. I have a Kindle, it's filled with books. You tell me about a book, I simply order it on the probability. If it's important enough for you to mention, it's probably important enough for me to read, and because I consume close to 100 books a year, I'm going to get there. I also fly a lot. So it's like, what do you do on flights? I read. All right? I consumed the Nokia history book on the way from Canada here. It's good. I highly recommend it. But however you learn. Make it part of your routine. It's a one-way trip. Once new knowledge is in, it doesn't come back out, right? Even if you can't remember it word for word, that's not important. Your mind is modified by a new idea, and you are the composite of all of those ideas. The only other aspect I add to that is be careful with what you learn and what you read. I like the philosophy of the information diet, that we kind of want to look at the nutritional value of something before we consume it, because for exactly that same reason. Even a bad idea, once consumed, modifies your mind permanently. Don't let them, right? Look at your sources before you consume. Thinking in roles. Often we're focused on the job and even pushed to be the cog. You are the front-end developer. You are the node developer. You are the DBA. The broader role, responsibility for data, responsibility for customer value, responsibility for creating new things, the roles that we're in. They give us more reach into the organization, more understanding. If we're responsible for customer value, let's start with, do you know how the company makes money? We should all probably know that. And then you see your role in that. Rarely in software are we front line to revenue generation, right? We're staff. We provide the tools that allow the folks making money for the organization to be more effective. Super valuable. We are force multipliers. Know how that works. That's part of your broader role. Being vulnerable. Trust is a vulnerability exercise. I cannot have you trust me if I don't trust you, right? I have to share a value for you to share a value with me. All those things are normal. And so you have to do both. There's no easy way. You can't be walled off and building trust. Bring those books back up again. I hope you have a great last day of the conference. Thank you for your time.